Well, I don't really know. What I do know is YouTube's live streaming really kind of stinks. And like my special guest buddy said, you know, um, YouTube kind of stinks for them being kind of quirky and kind of glitchy, and it kind of doesn't exactly work for streaming and streaming with a guest and those kinds of things. So I will try to do something else with them here soon, and we'll get it uploaded to the channel, and you can watch that. In the meantime, if there's any of you still hanging around, or you want to kind of jump back in and see if I'm on here again, please indulge yourself and go ahead and do so. I apologize. This is my first attempt at trying to figure out how to stream on the channel, and how this whole technology of that works. I really kind of suck at this social media tech kind of a thing. So I really have to hand it to all of those who can go in and do all the cool editing and do all of the streaming and all the stuff that they do, because that is just not my wheelhouse in today's technology. So anyway, I'm just going to kind of go through a little bit of Bane for myself for a little while, and you can kind of throw some stuff in chat, and we can kind of talk about that a little bit if you want to do that, and kind of share it around and kind of let me know what you think. Um, so one of the things about Dragonbane that I mentioned before was its deadliness, and I can tell you, if you want to really see how deadly it is from a solo game perspective, I would very much encourage you to go to one of my buddies' channels, Adventures with Dice, and there, Rob. He will actually do some cool solo plays using Dragonbane solo rules, and he will showcase for you just exactly how deadly Dragonbane can be. And I don't mean deadly as in, you have just this whole stable of characters, and every time you sit down to play, you're going to go through one, two, three, four, five, six characters, crazy stuff like that. But it is very challenging. Takes a lot to go in your favor. So that deadliness is always kind of around. That's the old school thing, old school essentials, BX, Beckme, first edition, even second edition, until you start getting to the WotC era. And then it kind of loses itself a little bit, kind of goes off the rails some. But that's Dragonbane as far as like how it actually works for deadliness. Like I said, it's your hit points are based on your con score, and that is all. And your only other protections are your armor that you're wearing. Like I said, your armor has an armor rating, and your shield adds to that, and your helmet would also add to that to make your total damage reduction armor rating for it. And then you, on your turn, could use your action to evade, which is dodge, or to parry if you have an ability to do that with either a weapon or a shield. Or you can evade or parry using your reaction, which would then use your action for the turn. Okay. Otherwise, you're just gonna get whacked. So like I said, that long spear doing 2d8, and maybe you've got a high enough strength to where you get that extra d6 dice on melee attacks. That's 2d8 and your d6 every time they whack you. That's going to get deadly pretty fast. But it makes for some neat strategy and play. It also makes for some neat strategy and play as far as initiative is concerned, because you get a move and an action, and that's it. You get a reaction, which would use your action for the turn. Then you also get a few free actions, but of course, they're free actions, so they're not a plethora of things that you can do. But it makes it a really deadly fun game. Now, it does have a resting and a healing mechanic system built into it. So, there is that aspect of it. But it's not anywhere like a 5th edition modern system, for example, or a Pathfinder 2nd edition system where, you just heal up constantly throughout the course of the adventuring day. And so you're always up on your toes. Everything's always good and you're good to go. You're going to wear yourself down pretty quickly. And then it is still the same 3 death saves, but they're a little more difficult to make. and the healing that you get for the resting is quite significantly lower, and so all of this combined together makes the system rather deadly. Um, I'm going to go into the system real quick for you. But if you do get a chance, first of all, I would highly recommend, if you like Dragonbane, to pick up this hardback rulebook, because not only does it have um, that ability of the things that I've been talking about, but I mean also the ability of the fact that it's a little better to withstand the test of time in using it. The other one's a more of a bound paperback, glue back book, I should say, and it's not going to hold up to the constant opening and closing and using it at the table, whereas this will, because of the binding, right? This will hold up a lot longer at the table. Plus, it's just a pretty book. Um, but in here also in this hardback is a new adventure for you. This one has an adventure already in it, and then this one has a new one called The Castle of Robber Knight. So this is also another one that you might want to pick up for purposes of that. I also want to tell you that in relation to like fifth edition, for example, fifth edition has the same system whereby you have advantage and disadvantage. In Dragonbane, it's called boons and banes. So it is a very similar. It's actually exactly the same thing. Just it's different in how you acquire the boon or the bane or the advantage or the disadvantage on your die, and then whether or not they are stackable in and of themselves. I don't believe, if I recall correctly, that fifth edition allows you to have multiple boons and or suffer multiple banes, or in other words, multiple things of advantage and multiple things of disadvantage. I don't remember. I'm not a big fan of it. I do run it for my wife and kids occasionally, and I have ran Pathfinder second edition for them several times, but I'm not a huge fan of that. So that's typically why I don't. And so that's why I don't know that. The interesting thing I like here in the Dragonbane, obviously, one thing that really stands out to me is art. Like, take a look at that image right there. That artwork is just really, really cool. And that is scattered throughout the book. Obviously, Mr. Darkwing Duck, if you will, for yourself on the back. Sweden has a very big thing with their games with ducks. But I just think that guy does look pretty cool. But if that's not your thing, you don't have to play it. But I just think that first and foremost, the artwork, take a look at that. That artwork there is just really, really cool for this section about your character. There are different playable kin in here. Human, halfling, dwarf, elf, mallard, and wolfkin. But then there are some additional kin in here which are rare, and they are cat people, centaur, fairy, frog people, harpy, carchion, lizard people, mermaids, minotaurs, naiads, satyrs, swan maidens, and tree kin. Now, some of those are not playable kin, and some of them are. And I would say that's entirely up to your game, whether you would allow those kin to be played at your table. I know as far as like cat people are concerned, they have all the information for you to play them and what their kin ability is, or their, if you want to use another term, they'd be kin feat. But like the centaur and the fairy do not have it. The frog people do. The harpy does not. The carchion do. The lizard people do. The mermaids do not. The minotaur does not. The naiad does not. The satyr does. The swan maiden does not. And the treekin does not. So that's indicative to me that you wouldn't allow them in your game as player character kin. That doesn't mean you can't. What do we got here? Oh, yeah. He uses StreamYard too. Yeah. StreamYard and OBS are kind of the ones that I've heard of that are typically the ones that you would use. I was just thinking that, hey, YouTube should just make it really easy for you to jump on and stream, and you can share it with some people and they can jump on with you. And it says that you can, and then it turns out that it actually doesn't work very well. So that's kind of my bad. Sorry about that, dude. We will try to connect here again soon. Um, some other things about Dragonbane that I really enjoy, other than the artwork, other than the different professions that you can play. I'll let you know what those are really quick. If you don't already know, the professions are artisan, bard, fighter, hunter, knight, mage, mariner, merchant, scholar, and thief. Um, so other than that, the thing that I find interesting about it that I kind of like is the roll under mechanic. And I say I like it just simply because it's totally divergent from what I'm normally used to in old school, which is the roll over mechanic. In that you use the d20 and you're attempting to roll a particular target number. That's in the more modern and the d20 based systems where you have target numbers of DCs, things like that. In the other system, it was to roll to hit a particular armor class that or better on a, like first edition had the attack matrix, second edition largely used just Thaco as your base number, and you kind of went from there. But Dragonbane is the opposite of that, which is a roll under system. It's unique if you're one of those gamers where you got those really crappy dice that never seem to roll anything more than single digit numbers all the time. Hey, Dragonbane's your game for that D20. Okay. If you have dice that tend to roll a little higher, then maybe you want to play some old school. All right. So I kind of like that idea in the system just because it's different. They also have in here, this is a skill-based system. It is a classless system. So they don't have any classes. They just have professions that you practice. And then classes don't exist, but skills do. So this skill-based system is what you're going to use for everything that you're going to accomplish in the game. And you have the core skills of acrobatics and awareness, bartering, beast lore, bluffing, bushcraft, crafting, evade, healing, hunting, fishing, languages, myths and legends, performance, persuasion, riding, seamanship, sleight of hand, sneaking, spot hidden, swimming, and then your various weapon skills. And the roll under system works for every single one of these. So if you're going to actually attack someone else, unless you have another situation that would give you a bane on the attack roll, which means you roll disadvantage in the other systems, 2 die take the worst, which in this case would be the higher. Or you have a boon, which would mean actually it would be beneficial, or advantage. You'd roll the 2 dice and take the lower in this system. That is best is to your advantage, obviously. But otherwise, you're going to roll against your skill. So if you're going to attack someone with your sword, you're just going to roll your sword skill. If you succeed, you hit them. That's also very foreign to us old schoolers because we're either used to the armor class based system where lower is better, or the ascending armor class system, and that's descending. The ascending armor class system where higher is better. So that's your DC, your target number to hit their armor class, if you will. That's not this system. This system is you roll your skill or less and you succeed at hitting them, no matter what it is, whether it's an enemy, which in this game, there are monsters, quote unquote. There are enemies, I should say, is kind of what they are, which is those who use weapons, those creatures that you're going to fight that use weapons. And then there's monsters who don't have weapons. They just have abilities that they can perform, generally on a list, a 1 through 6 or a D6 list that you're going to roll, and they're always going to hit. So that also makes it deadly. So if you're fighting a giant spider, for example, they're always going to hit you. The only way you can avoid that is if you burn your action every turn to evade and roll out of the way and get that 1 extra square of movement away from them. Otherwise, they're always going to hit you. Very few monsters have the ability to actually have an attack parried or blocked with a shield. If they do, it'll say in the writing. Otherwise, if you're going to fight a giant spider, you're just going to know that you're going to get hit by one of their attacks, period. Like I said, the only thing you can do is keep burning your action every turn and evade, trying to get yourself into a better position, maybe get your mage the ability to do something against it if they're back away, something like that. So that makes it really deadly. But what it makes it easier for you is that weapon skill that you just basically roll that skill equal to or less, and you hit whatever it is you're trying to hit. So there's no real fussing about numbers. You know exactly what your number is on your paper at the time, which is in a way for me the downside for Dragonbane. And I say that not that it's horrible, but most of the games that I'm used to running from back in the old school were DM facing. DM facing. Okay. This system is player facing. The players all know what it is they're going to need to roll. It's all on their sheet. You don't need to tell them much of anything other than if you tell them they get boons or banes on their rolls, or there's some sort of description you're going to add, or other thing of that nature, maybe a running condition or something that's going to be going on in the environment. Otherwise, you are looking at, as a player, you're looking at your sheet and you already know everything that you need to roll right there in front of you. That's vastly different than old school. And I say it's a negative only from the standpoint of being the GM. This is called the GM in this system. I'm used to DM all of these years, but GM in this system, you're going to have it a little bit more difficult to hide what it is that you're doing with your players because they already have everything in front of them. They're not going to need to ask you for a number. They're going to need to ask you for an armor class if that's something that you shared. Those kinds of things from back in the day. They already know what it all is. It's easier in a way, and it's also a little bit more difficult. It's more challenging on the game master because he has a hard time hiding things, but it's easier on the game master because he doesn't have to keep track of any numbers. They have the numbers. So you decide for yourself which of that you like and don't like. And I will say, yes, I agree with you absolutely, Rob. Death saves have been your friend, man. Your solo game, like, dude, it's so cool to listen to and watch what you're doing, and so hilarious to to hear how exhausting or exasperating it gets when you have problems when you're stumbling through that. But man, it's also really cool because yeah, this thing is definitely deadly, and those death saves, man, they just keep coming up, and it's rough to not get to number 3 and not fail that thing. So it's pretty cool. Death saves, by the way, is you're just rolling against your con. So it's just like a skill roll or like something else I just described. You're just rolling equal to or less than your con score. Okay. You could have a bane on it, depending, or you could even have a boon on it, I guess, depending also. But yeah, it's a con roll. Yeah, no, I couldn't get that guest feature to work at all. We tried and tried, and it said that it would time out and say that he was wanting to enter and waiting for approval, and never let me know where the approval was. Never gave me a notification of anything. So yeah, it just didn't work. I guess I'm gonna have to buckle down and try to learn StreamYard or OBS, which I'd really rather not do. But if I want to keep doing this, that's kind of what I got to do. All right. I think the next thing we'll talk about is something interesting in the system, which is heroic abilities. And all players, except for the mage, gets one heroic ability at the start of the game, and then you can earn new ones later. The cool thing about it being a skill-based system is every time you level, and since it's classless, level is just simply increasing in one's skills that you have on your sheet. Once each skill hits an 18, which is the highest you can go, you get a new heroic ability. And then as a GM, it's told to you in the book that you're advised to give a heroic ability perhaps at the end of a great mission or a great adventure, maybe a second one for something really cool or whatever you want to call it that you're running. So you could get an extra one that way, but heroic abilities are obviously going to be pretty rare because most of your skills are going to be either 5, 6, or 7 in rating, or they might be double that if you have training in it. Okay. So getting it to an 18 is going to be kind of difficult to do. But there's a bunch of heroic abilities in here that are cool that will help you to improve your character. If you have the book, they're on page 35 and continue forward from there all the way up to page 39. Some of these in here, I feel like as a negative are a bit OP, and some of them are kind of right on point, and some of them are a little lackluster. Okay, I think that's the way with all systems, all games, right? The way they're designed is, some of them come off really awesome, some of them come off just okay, and some of them come off like from the GM's perspective, like, whoa, there's no way I would give that out anytime soon, right? And that's the same with old school too. That kind of thing fell out that way. There were some things you just didn't give to players really early. Um, I remember way back in the day playing a halfling fighter thief, and that was the first time that race and class were separated, when I had actually moved over to that and played in my cousin's game. And that halfling fighter thief ended up in the against the Giants series. And during the course of time and all that against the Giants series, we were given a great deal of powerful items: gauntlets of overpower, girdle of giant strength, and a hammer of thunderbolts. And I knew the name. If you're old school, you know exactly what that means. I was kind of like little Thor. And that was quite campaign disrupting for the dungeon master and pretty difficult. And some of these heroic abilities can also do that for you as the game master as well. Okay. One of the ones you can get, for example, since you only get one action in a turn, um, you're all going to randomly draw initiative. Initiative in this game takes place by card draw. In a deck of cards, you can use standard playing cards, or you can use the Dragonbane initiative cards. They are numbered 1 through 10. Lower is better. Um, and you draw your initiative card, and let's say you get a 9. Well, okay, you kind of suck. So if you want to go anything better than that, then you're out of luck. However, if you want to spend one willpower point and have the heroic ability veteran, you can activate that in a combat round. And let's say you do a 3. Well, wow, that's pretty hard to get that 3, 2, or 1 the next time you draw. So I think I'm going to activate the veteran heroic ability, and it's going to cost me a willpower point, but I'm going to get to save that initiative card each round every time I spend a willpower point until I run out of willpower. And your willpower points are based on your will stat. Okay, your willpower stat. So if you have an 18, you got 18 willpower points. And if you're that profession just happens to be that you're that knight, for example, that has that veteran heroic ability with a weapon skill of 12 or greater, then guess what? You're just going to be able to burn through 17 rounds of keeping that 3 that you drew. Okay, for example. So that one's pretty powerful. There's another one in here, twin shot, that you need a bow skill of 12. It costs you 3 willpower, which is the limiting factor. But by activating it when you attack with a bow, you shoot 2 arrows instead of 1. And you're only going to roll just once to hit, but you're going to roll with that bane, which means the limiting factor is the bane, right? You're going to roll 2 dice and you're going to take the worst, which means the higher number. But if you've got a skill of 12 and you roll an 11 and a 7, well, either one hits. So what did it really matter? Your percentages are pretty high that bane's not going to be as effective, and you're going to hit them with 2 arrows. Now, let me just flip back here for you and tell you about ranged weapons. As a matter of fact, if that's a longbow, you're going to do a d12 damage. And let's say you got just a d4 from your agility score as extra damage. Now you're doing a d12 and a d4, and then you get to shoot 2 arrows, both of which hit. So now you're doing 2d12 and 2d4 with that one use of the 3 willpower points. Okay, so the game can be just as deadly for you as it can be for the enemies. And so there's some good and some bad. There's some give and some take here with the system. So that's why I say it's bad, but it's not terrible. And it's good and sometimes great would be the kind of the way to say that. Okay. I might go back over when I can actually figure out how to do OBS or StreamYard. I might get my buddy back on here and we'll go over some of these together and kind of talk about them. And I might cover them later on a different video on the channel. I told you that initiative was based on a card draw of a 1 through 10 on a deck of cards, or the initiative cards from Free League. But you can choose to hold your action and wait. Why would you want to do that? Okay. Well, it's pretty easy. you'd want to wait and see whether the creature, the enemy, they call them NPCs, basically any enemy that can use a weapon and or wear armor, things of that nature. You want to see whether they're going to hit you or not, because if they're going to hit you, you might want to dodge, which is evade, or you might want to parry, which is the ability to parry using your weapon skill. Okay, you might want to do that. Or if they don't hit you, then you're free to take your action for the turn. So if you draw a 3 for initiative and the enemy draws a 7, well, you've got a buddy that's got an 8. You're like, hey, I'm gonna swap with my buddy. You go ahead and go, dude. I'm gonna take your 8, right? And then you're gonna wait and see what that enemy does to you on their 7. If they attack you and miss, man, you don't got to worry about it. Just go ahead and take your 8 and run, right? Um, and you can swap initiative cards that way as well. So everybody reveals their initiative cards. Again, that's not like old school. Initiative was kind of done, if you did it this way, it was done behind the screen. So in old school, they may not necessarily know when you go, and you can kind of pop that surprise on them, right? That's not how it works in Dragonbane. When you draw the cards for initiative, or it doesn't have to work that way. And that by raw, it doesn't work that way. You draw initiative, they draw initiative, and everybody shows what their cards are. They lay them all out on the table. And then when you want to use your action or your reaction, flip your card over and you're done. That's the indication that you're done for the turn. But the GM has those cards out as well. So you can do that with them too. You can always swap for a later card number. So it's an interesting mechanic. Okay. Now this says you can swap cards with other player characters as well as NPCs. I'm not a big fan on if you say I'll let you swap with monsters. It is an optional rule in the waiting section on page 41 on the rule book. And monsters will typically have a ferocity rating, which means that they're going to act multiple times in a turn. That's all that means. In the old school, it was attacks per round or number of attacks per round, and here it's ferocity that determines. A lot of monsters have a 2. So that means they're going to get 2 initiative draws. They're going to get 2 actions in that turn, plus a movement, right? And it says they're going to draw multiple initiative cards. And in that case, you decide which card you want. Okay, so and that's talking to the players here. So you're going to decide which card you want to swap with the monster. They never wait, so they're not going to swap, but you can. But obviously you're only swapping, but you're swapping down, so you can never improve your initiative. You can only wait and go later in the turn. So it's not as bad as it sounds. If you were able to swap and actually go get better on the turn, that's just blowout overpower to me. And the first couple times we played it, we actually did it that way. Man, that was off the chart wrong. That did not feel right and did not work at all. So you can play it that way if you want to, but as written as the optional rule here on the waiting section on page 41, you're going to swap for what's a worse number than what you drew. But that's so you can let them go ahead and go, and you can see what they do. All right. So there's an interesting combat or tactical dynamic that's going on in there. But again, as you can see, it's player facing, right? So that means the players have the option here. When it's talking about you can swap with NPCs, meaning those enemies who can use weapons that I said earlier, they can't refuse the trade. Okay, you can't swap initiative cards with anyone who's already had their turn or who've chosen to wait earlier in the round, but they can't refuse the trade. So this is very player facing. So that means the players are always going to have the upper hand here, if you will. Okay, the difference in that is if they jump you, they get surprised, or they really jump you and they get ambush. Okay. Those are the only ways that the GM kind of has to adjudicate getting a drop on the characters a little bit. But still, it's not much of a one as far as surprise is concerned, because the characters have awareness skill and they can roll awareness skill to determine if they're going to get dropped on. Okay. Now I do those as secret rolls when I run. So the players don't actually know exactly what's around. That way I don't call out to everyone and say, hey, make me an awareness roll. Well, your antenna goes up for everyone around the table and they go, hey, so there's there's something going on here, guys. Let's keep track of what's going on. Let's be a little more cautious. I do it on the other side of the screen, so I'll take down everybody's awareness skill number, and then I'll roll it myself behind the screen. And of course, being the old school GM, I'm going to do a whole bunch of rolling behind the screen of stuff that maybe don't matter, just so that I can keep you off balance and you not know what I'm actually rolling that's legit or not. But that's just the way I do it. So that's something interesting about it. That is both a good and a bad, I think, in some ways, depending on how you think about it. There are reactions, as I said. You can parry your dodge, which is evade, or your weapon skill, to either do it with your shield or do it with your weapon. Excuse me. You do have free actions in here. You can draw, exchange, or put away a weapon that you've kept at hand. That's shorthand for saying the weapons that you have directly on your person to easily grab. You can have up to 3 of them. You can change position. That means you can throw yourself to the ground prone, or you can stand up from prone. That's a free action. You can drop an item to the ground, or you can shout or say a few words. Those are all free actions. And actually, you can do each one of those one time, all in one given turn. Now, depending on how many you have at the table, that could get a little annoying. Okay, so you'd have to kind of rein that in a little bit. But you can do all those plus your movement and your action on your turn. But like I said, once you've had your action or your reaction, then you flip your initiative card, and that indicates that your turn is over. All right. This is, of course, Free League Publishing is in Sweden, so they're still on the metric system. And so in here, everything is stated in terms of meters, kilometers, stuff like that. So they also, in the book here, kindly, from the beta until now, actually updated it for combat maps, so that when they say it's a 2x2 meter, they just mean a 5 foot by 5 foot square. So that way you know how to use it on combat grid maps. I think in our house, we're so used to that at this point now, it's pretty difficult to kind of get somebody away from that. I kind of like to do theater of the mind as much as I can, but the grid square thing is a thing, and it's been played so long, and it can be kind of fun. So you do that as you want to in your games. But just so that when you're reading the rules and it says 2x2 meters, they really just mean that's a 5 foot square. Okay. So anything that has a range in terms of meters, you would just divide that by 2, and that's how many 5 foot squares. That's the way I run it. It just makes it so much easier. Melee combat, as I said, you're either going to do brawling, which is the fisticuffs, the hand-to-hand, or you're going to use a weapon skill. Okay. There are some cool optional things in here, but one of the things about the dice mechanic that I really like is if you roll a 1, that's the same as a 20 in another system. It's a crit, but in here it's called a dragon. And if you roll a 20 in here, which was a 1 critical fail in the other system, it is called a demon. Okay, and those rolls actually have an impact. But unlike, like let's say 3rd edition, well, specifically, I would say maybe 2.5 heading towards 3rd, which was skills and powers. That DM screen, which I had and used a lot, had crit charts on it. But man, it just completely jerked you out of immersion to be able to roll on, okay, where did it hit you? Okay, how did it affect you? Okay, how bad was the injury and what does it affect later? And then go to the next person down the line and the next person. This system is not like that. I'll give you an example of rolling a dragon or a crit hit in melee combat. You have 3 options when you roll that. You roll if you choose the first one, and you roll that crit, that means that nat 1 on the die. You're going to double the amount of dice for the weapon's damage before adding in your stat-based damage bonus and any other bonuses. So, for example, if you get a critical hit with a broadsword, which is 2d6 base damage, and you have a damage bonus of a d4, then you're going to do 4d6 base damage plus that d4. That's the first option for that dragon on the melee combat. The second one is this. You can immediately perform a second attack against another enemy. This additional attack is a free action. Now, it doesn't say it in the book, but the way I run it is it's going to have to be adjacent to you or adjacent to that enemy, because you're not going to hit the first enemy and not drop them and then hit the one right directly behind them because they're covered up. Okay. Um, so I would say it has to be adjacent either to you or them. But the fact that you rolled that dragon and then lets you get that second free attack, that's pretty cool. Okay. And then the last one is if they have armor, then that armor has no effect against the attack. Now, some monsters have an armor, but it really means an armor rating. And sometimes it'll say in that entry, if it's armor that can be penetrated by something or it can't be. Okay. And that will affect this dragon roll. But if they have armor, then armor has no effect against this dragon that you rolled. That means it's found a gap or a weak spot. But this effect can only be chosen if the attack deals piercing damage. Okay? So those are ways in which that dragon can be cool for you. Then demon has something pretty cool as well. As you can see right here, it actually has an entire chart. And I think that's pretty cool. The demon chart in here, if you roll a demon when you're attacking in melee combat, you actually miss your target and you cannot push the roll. So you say, what does pushing mean? Okay, pushing means anytime you roll a skill and you really need to make it, but you didn't make it with the first roll, you can say, hey, you know what? I'm going to take a condition on one of my stats that applies to this situation you and the GM agree upon, or it's the one that's directly connected to the stat. You take that condition, and then you can re-roll. Okay, so that's your ability to re-roll mechanic there. Okay, you can push, but you can only do that one time. Okay, now obviously if you have Banes, you would have to re-roll with Banes again. If you have boons, you'd get to re-roll with boons again. Remember, Banes are disadvantage, boons are advantage. Okay. But when you roll a demon, which is a nat 20, okay, in this system, it would have been a 1 in the old school. You miss your target and you cannot push the roll, and you might suffer an additional mishap. So you're going to roll on the table below. First one on a d6, that's what you're going to roll, okay? The first one, you drop your weapon at your feet, and picking it up would be an action. Or 2, you expose yourself to the enemy who gets a free attack that cannot be dodged or parried, okay? Third, your weapon cuts so deep into an object that it gets stuck, and pulling it free requires a strength roll, which counts as an action. 4, you accidentally toss your weapon a d3 plus 3 meters away, and to pick it up, you must move and then perform an action. Okay, remember I said you're going to take that 2 by 2 meters as a 5-foot square, right? Okay. And then 5, you slam your weapon into something hard and you damage the weapon. Weapons in here all have a reliability score. Okay. Or not a reliability score, a durability score. Okay. So each weapon that is durable, it can only take so much damage before it's broken and can't be used again without a crafting check. Okay. And then number 6 is you hit yourself by mistake and you roll damage as usual, but without any damage bonus. Okay. Yes, absolutely. Losing an action to pick up a weapon. Yeah, that's kind of a pain in the rear. I understand that, but it only actually happens when you roll a demon in melee. Okay. So that means that's only when you're going to roll that nat 20. Otherwise, as part of your actions, you can draw, exchange, or put away a weapon that you kept at hand. It says drop a weapon on the ground. Actually, rules as written, if you want to pick up a weapon from the ground or from your inventory, it does take your action. I would rule that if you drop it on the ground, you could use it as a free action to pick it up, but that's be a GM adjudication. So like you could strategically drop your sword to where it's kind of cocked onto your foot, and then you could kick it back up into your hand. I could see those kinds of things as being a case by case basis. If you could pull it off, I don't have a problem with that. You just make an agility check to drop it to where it's conveniently able to be flipped back up into your hand. I would allow something like that. But otherwise, yes. Um, it does take that particular action to do that. I like the fact that the demon roll in melee chart actually exists. Something I like from Shadow Dark that they don't do in here exactly. They do have a mishap for magic and table in here, and you do roll to cast. But Shadow Dark's table is a lot scarier than this particular table in here. We might get to that either today, or we might get to it in another video, probably in another video. And then you can parry in here. But again, every time you parry, which can either be your action or your reaction, right? Then you can do so, but you don't declare it until your opponent rolls damage. Okay, so that's valuable to you. You don't actually have to declare you're going to parry until after you see whether they're going to roll damage. Okay, so it's right before then. Okay, so you got to wait till they hit you first, otherwise you're parrying nothing. And you cannot parry unarmed, and you can't parry and dodge the same attack. But you can parry while you're prone just as well as you can dodge while you're prone. And when you parry, you're going to roll an insta skill level for your weapon. So the good news is you're probably pretty good at parrying with that longsword that you're really good at. You're probably not so good at parrying with a warhammer, which you just picked up here recently in the dungeon and don't know how to use very well. Okay. And like I said, it's a reaction. The weapon has durability, so if it does miss you, you won't suffer any damage. But if the damage exceeds the durability rating for the weapon, then it's damaged, and it can't be used until you repair it. But it's a repair with a crafting roll, which everybody has every skill in the game. You're either untrained or trained, so everybody could potentially craft to try to repair it. Just the question is whether you'd be any good at it or not, right? If you have a shield out in hand, which would be one of your weapons at hand, then you'd be able to parry with it instead of your weapon. And there's no skill for a shield. You just use any strength-based melee skill except knives or stabs, and you can parry with your shield. And then if you happen to take piercing damage when you parry, it never damages the weapon or the shield because of the piercing effect. Pretty hard for an arrow to pierce through the blade of a sword. It might pierce through a wooden shield, but it's certainly not going to damage the shield with anything that matters, right? And then monster attacks, like I said, typically cannot be parried, but can be dodged, unless it says in the writing of the monster. Obviously, NPCs are enemies, monsters, quote unquote, but they're enemies for purposes of the fact that they can use weapons. That terminology there is kind of rough to handle because I'm used to every monster being a monster, and everything else is just environment, an object, or your characters, right? NPCs are people you run into in town or out on the road. So having an NPC versus having a monster, and it just boggles my mind a little bit when I try to approach that, but I get it. Now, whenever you parry, there's an optional rule. Whenever you parry, you and the enemy can be moved. You're in control of that movement for one square, and you can move one square. So that's kind of cool. You can block and step back one. You can block and step back one, and they move back one. That kind of a thing. Also, when you dodge or evade is your skill that you're going to be using to dodge. You also get a one square movement in that as well. And as a rule, monster attacks can be dodged. And yes, I would agree, Mage. Losing an action to grab a weapon is fine if you're in the thick of melee. I absolutely agree because that tit and tat, that back and forth craziness of combat and stuff like that. That I even still remember from old school. That makes perfect sense that you're kind of dancing around, dodging around, and having real problems trying to keep up with that and keep a hold of your weapons and all that kind of stuff. So I don't have a problem with that, because to try to reach down and pick up your sword in an inconvenient spot and not let the enemy hit you makes sense as far as verisimilitude. As far as rule systems, yeah, depending on how comfortable you are in the newer systems versus the old, you don't really care for that, and that's fine. However you want to play is cool, but I agree with you. Yeah, that's fine. All right. There are a few special attacks you can do in here. Um, there's a find a weak spot if your weapon's piercing. Um, I would say that's kind of like a called shot in a sense from the old school, but it's only for piercing. You can try to find a gap in their armor or even their natural armor, but you get a bane or disadvantage on the attack roll. But they count as armorless if you succeed. You can topple them. It's a knockdown, it's a trip, whatever you want to call it, but you can topple them. That's You're going to roll your skill level in your weapon against their evade, so it's an opposed roll. Whoever rolls lower wins. Tie always goes to the attacker, to the character. Um, and then you could even do it as a brawling if you wanted to trip them, and then you would just roll brawling against their evade. It counts as an action for you because you're doing the tripping. It doesn't count for them to roll their evade. That's just their resistance to your trip or your topple. And a weapon, the staff actually has that as a special property. Is it has the topple property. Um, then you have disarm. You could try to disarm them. Um, Again, an opposed roll between you and the enemy's skill level, but in this case, you're using your weapon skill and they're using their weapon skill. Again, it's an action for you and not an action for them. And these are all. This is a green box text, as you can see here in the book. So that's all optional things. You do not have to allow any of those when you run it. It's however complicated or uncomplicated you want to make the game. There's also grapple. You're going to use brawling against them to do that, and it's an opposed brawling roll between yours and theirs. And then if you succeed, then you're going to have them pinned, and then you're going to have an action every turn to use. You're going to have to use your action every turn to keep a hold of them. They're going to get a free action to try to break free and then take their action for that turn, but they're going to have to do it nonetheless. Okay, and then you can also perform your action on your turn to break. Okay. Hey, thanks, man. Yeah, this is one of my favorite shirts. Really, really old school, old first edition player's handbook. If you can see that image just a little bit there. Um, yeah, yeah. And I'm kind of partial to this version of the first edition player's handbook image as opposed to the other, but that's just me. Um, there's some different and interesting tactics that you can perform here. I'm going to read you this melee tactics section because it relates to what I was saying about initiative. To be successful in melee combat, it's important to realize that your most precious resource is your actions. You only get one per round, including reactions such as dodge or parry. If several player characters are fighting together, it's often very effective to focus on the same enemy, as that person can only parry or dodge once, which leaves them vulnerable to multiple attacks. But always remember that you too are exposed to attacks after performing your action. The heroic abilities defensive and lightning fast will significantly increase your ability to defend against multiple opponents. Okay, and we're going to read that here in just a second. In single combat against an opponent as powerful as yourself, it might be wise to wait and let the enemy strike first. If their attack misses, you don't need to parry or dodge, and you can then perform your own attack while the enemy is unable to protect themselves against it because they've already used their action, so they don't get a reaction. But the drawback is that you're going to surrender the initiative to the enemy, who may choose to do something completely different than you expected anyway. All right, so I'm going to go back and read you defensive and lightning fast because that's two heroic abilities that will change a little bit of your tactics significantly. So here's defensive. You need any weapon skill of 12 or better as your requirement. And if you're any kind of a fighter type or put something into a weapon to start the game, therefore you're trained in it, and you have any decent stat at all, you're probably going to hit that 12 like right away. It costs you 3 willpower points to use this heroic ability. You may attempt to parry an attack without consuming your action for the round. This bonus parry can be used at any time during the round. You may only try to parry the same attack once, and you cannot try to dodge and parry the same attack. This ability can be used multiple times per round as long as you have enough willpower. Okay, so you can only try to parry the same attack once, and you can't dodge and parry the same attack, but it can be used multiple times around. So although you can't use defensive twice against the same attack from that same enemy. If you've got two enemies on you, you can use it once against that guy and once against that guy over there, right? So that but costs you 6 willpower. So depending on what your willpower score is, that might not be a great option, but it exists. Okay. Now let's look at the other one, which is lightning fast. Lightning fast requires that you have an evade of 12. That can be a little more difficult to come by if you didn't take training in that one, but it's still possible. Okay, and it costs 2 willpower points. When you're drawing the initiative card at the start of a combat round, you will draw 2 cards instead of 1 and choose which one you want. You can only activate this heroic ability once per round. Okay, so this gives you the ability to hold easier because you got 2 cards. Okay, so that's a bonus there in that particular aspect. Okay, and I kind of like both of those. They're not OP, and yet they are still there for you for heroic abilities. Like I said, every character gets one except for a starting mage because magic is their heroic ability. Everyone else gets one to start the game. If you play solo, you get 2. And the second one is one of the ones that they would tell you to choose in that solo, the Alone in Deepfall Breach solo supplement that comes with the box set. And I would highly encourage you to take the one that gives you 2 actions every round. But that's just me. Again, go check out Adventures with Dice's solo, and you'll be able to see him utilize that all the time. And it's very needed, man. It's very cool. But you have one that they give you, okay, or you can select a different one. You just talk with your GM, okay, so you're not stuck exactly with the one that it tells you ought to take, right, when you're first creating your character. All right, we talked about melee combat with the dragons and the demons, or in other words, the dragons being good, the 1, the demons being a 20, which is bad. And if you roll a demon in ranged combat, when performing the ranged attack, you miss your target, you cannot push the roll, and you'll suffer an additional mishap and roll on the table below. So here's that table. 1, you drop your weapon at your feet. Picking it up is an action. 2, you run out of arrows and you must get more before you can use the weapon again. Reroll for your sling or throwing weapons. Okay. The reason why that is because a sling itself comes with basically unlimited ammo. It's a rock, okay, and you can carry a bunch of those. Don't even count against your items that you carry around. Okay. 3, you hit a valuable or important item nearby. The GM decides what it is. That'd be cool if you were going for that expensive vase that you needed to collect for your mission. 4, you break your weapon. Any use of the weapon gets a bane until it's repaired by an artisan. 5, you accidentally hit a random player character or friendly NPC. Roll for damage as usual, including damage bonus. And 6, you hit yourself by mistake. Roll for damage as usual, but without damage bonus. Well, that's good. Because if you had D6 damage bonus because of a high agility, that would really stink to be rolling that damage bonus die and get a 6 on yourself. So it's good that they excluded that. All right. Right, mage. Yeah, right. That's an option for one. I'm thinking like that gemstone that you just didn't realize it was quite that delicate that you didn't want to shatter. Palace of the Silver Princess, I think, not to give anything away to anybody that hasn't played that, but Palace of the Silver Princess had that gemstone. I don't remember if that was shatterable or not, but boy, that would really stink if you miss and roll a demon roll on your ranged combat attack and hit the gem and whoops. What do you do now? I just think that would be funny, but I don't remember if it was if it was that or not, but I know there was a gemstone in there. um, range in here, it either has increments of maximum distance in meters, which again, I would just divide into and make that 5 foot squares. And then also range could be based on strength if it's a thrown like a dagger or something like that. Oh, that's right. Yeah, the gems in the Silver Princess could only be destroyed by specific things. That's true. That's true. Yeah. All right. Critical hit. Critical hit in ranged combat only has 2 options, but both of them are cool because, again, you're using a piercing weapon, most likely. Not necessarily if you're using a sling, but most everything else probably going to be piercing unless you're the dwarf that throws the hammers, right? The first option is if you roll that dragon, is your weapon damage dice is doubled. Exclude the damage bonus and other bonuses. You're going to roll twice as many, basically. So a critical hit with a longbow would inflict 2d12. That's scary. Okay. Then you would add your other bonuses to that. Why I say this game's pretty deadly. The other option would be armor. Natural armor would have no effect. It hits a gap or a weak spot. And that's only chosen, again, if you're using piercing damage. So it wouldn't work for a sling unless you were using a sling bullet, if you offered that to them. Or, like I said, a dagger, a knife, something like that. A spear, javelin. Parrying a ranged attack only works if you have a shield. Makes sense, right? Unlike, let's say, the dude in Scorpion King with the 2 swords that could block the arrows. Pretty neat. Never actually seen that happen in real life, but cool in the movie. But it doesn't work in here. Okay. You can still dodge, of course. And obviously, the parry and dodge, it works the same way as in melee combat, except for rolling a dragon doesn't give you a counterattack. And also, by the way, what I forgot to mention is if they roll a dragon on you, the only way you can defend against that is if you also roll a dragon back. Okay. So if they crit hit you, you're in trouble. All right. So you better make sure you get that dragon to get out of there. All right. Then it talks about obscured targets, talks about damage, but specifically what it talks about here that I might kind of finish off with is death and dying. I think you kind of got the idea that it's pretty deadly a little bit. Hey, Geek. Evening. How you doing? This is my first one, so it's kind of a mess. It's kind of a hot mess, but we're going with it, okay? You're like one of the masters of doing that. I've seen so many of yours, it's not funny, so kudos to you, dude. Death and dying in here. So if your hit points reach 0, you drop to the ground and you risk dying. You cannot move or perform any actions except for trying to rally. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. But then you have a death roll. On your turn and in each subsequent round, you're going to make a death roll. It's a death save, okay? But you're going to roll against your con. It's just like a skill roll. It's your con or less on that d20. And you're going to record the result. After 3 successful, you're going to recover 1d6 hit points and stop making death rolls. All right? If you have 3 failed rolls, then your character dies, okay? Now, interestingly, let's say you have a 15 con, you have 15 hit points. Well, that's cool that you made those 3 successful death rolls, but you only get d6 hit points. So it's still deadly because you might roll 2 or 1. So yeah, you stand up, but you have 1 hit point. So you're going right back down again. Okay. All right. And there is a little bit of yo-yo in there. I understand that. You'll kind of get a grasp on it. Like I said, check in. Oh, okay. Enjoy your dinner there, Mage. We'll talk to you later, man. There is a caveat in here. If you watch Rob on Adventures with Dice in his solo play, that yo-yoing thing is just really stinking scary and happens a lot, makes for fun play. I encourage you to watch that. They're really cool. All right. So if you roll a dragon when you're making that con roll, it's 2 successes. And if you roll a demon, it's 2 failures. Okay, if the combat ends, you're still going to make a death roll every round. Okay, every turn that's going by. But if you survive, those all reset, okay, just like in 5th edition. Now, additional damage. If you suffer additional damage while at 0 hit points, it counts as an automatic failure on the death roll. Okay? Now, instant death. I'm going to skip over to that side for a second. You don't record negative hit points. But if a single attack, fun about the Forbidden Lands map, for example, if you don't know that from Free League, they on their map, they have little stickers that you can put on the map. I put them on little miniature poker chips, and you can also put headstones where your characters died, and so you can have a remnant of that lying around on the map. That's kind of a neat idea. I wouldn't permanently put it on my map because I like to reuse my maps. But if hit points equal to your hit points, then you're just dead. You're not making any new rolls. Okay. So there is a deadly factor kind of always hanging around here. Now it mentioned that rally thing. Okay. Another player character within 10 meters and earshot can roll persuade to try to rally you to keep fighting despite having 0 hit, and that counts as an action. Okay. If you rally, you can continue acting as normal, but you must keep making death rolls as described above. So you're up and working if they succeed, even though you have 0 hit points, but you're still going to keep making the death saves. You're still going to the good chance of dying. And I say good chance, depending on your con, it might be a really good chance of not dying, but it just depends on what your con is. All right. But you're still going to keep making those death rolls. Now, you could also even try to rally yourself. Hey, come on, man, get up. You can do it. Right. You're still going to try to stand up, but it's on your own. But instead of rolling the persuade skill, you're actually just going to roll a will roll. Okay. And it's a bane. So rallying yourself to get back up is difficult to do, but not impossible. Okay. Now, a little section on saving life. When you have 0 hit points, another person next to you can save your life with a healing roll. If they don't have bandages, then it's at a bane. Okay. And that counts as an action. Multiple attempts are allowed. If the roll succeeds, you stop making death rolls and recover D6 hit points. Okay. But again, if they're near you and they're doing that, that's their action. So if there's an enemy right there that just took you down, and you use your action to heal your buddy that just went down, well, that's cool, but you're done. So you don't get a dodge, you don't get a parry, you're just going to take the hit, whatever it is, if they hit you. Okay. So that self-sacrifice part is also cool in the deadliness factor. Okay. And then all you're going to recover, again, is D6 hit points. And once you've made the roll and you've got the D6 rolled, there's no more healing roll being made here. You still get what you get. So they might roll a successful healing and you only get 1, right? Okay. And then obviously, the only other way you can heal is resting. Okay. And then obviously magic could save your life. There is a magical spell that can do that. All right. I think I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to actually sign off for this one. And again, sorry for all the hot mess of this stream. I'm going to try to learn either StreamYard or OBS to be able to do this better in the future. But I was really hoping that YouTube would have an easier way to do this for me, but it doesn't look like I'm going to get out of it. All right. And maybe I'll get a chance to jump on with Rob from Adventures with Dice and do it next time. Maybe if I can get that StreamYard going, then maybe I can have some others of you jump in and join here with me. Thanks again for watching. Thanks for those of you who are in the chat. Good to see you guys. And hope you have a great day today. Take care. God bless, prosper, and good gaming. We'll talk to you later. Bye.